Welcome to the Latin American Perspectives podcast. Today we have Roberta Villalón, issue editor for the newest LAP issue titled The Resurgence of Collective Memory, Truth, and Justice Mobilizations in Latin America. It is issue 202, volume 42, number 3, and the May 2015 issue of Latin American Perspectives. Roberta is an associate professor at the Sociology and Anthropology Department of St. John's University, New York City. Roberta is also affiliated with the Committee in Latin American and Caribbean Studies, the Women's and Gender Studies program, and the Global Development and Social Justice program at the university. Welcome, Roberta. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us.
Thank you.
So, Roberta, could you share with our listeners, what is this issue about?
Sure. So the special issue that I edited for Latin American Perspectives explores the resurgence of collective memory, truth, and justice mobilizations that occurred in the last couple of decades throughout the continent. With the turn of the century, the process of dealing with still unresolved human rights abuses under authoritarian regimes and civil wars in Latin America has been significantly reinvigorated. Truth, reconciliation, and justice efforts have been revisited. Trials of people involved with violence, torture, abductions, murders, and disappearances have been opened or reopened, and new interpretations and questions about what happened have been raised. The emergence of what can be thought of as a second wave of memory, truth, and justice mobilizations, the first wave occurring early on with transitions into democratic regimes and the signing of peace accords, was not necessarily a surprise. Scholars have been theorizing about coming of age of a generation born and raised during times of widespread violence and how they could awaken new interpretations and demands for addressing unsettled aspects of the past. Researchers, moreover, have pointed out that the global upsurge of a culture of memory, given the acceleration and democratization of history in post-modern capitalism, as well as the solidification of international human rights accountability, would be fertile ground in which renewed efforts by previously marginalized groups to seek justice and rebuild memory could flourish. At the same time, scholars focused on Latin America have noted that the processes of memory and reconciliation were bound to be a long haul because of the actual difficulty of reaching justice, the controversial implementation of amnesty laws, the pervasiveness of institutional corruption and impunity, together with growing socioeconomic inequalities, violence, and insecurity, and a rooted and peculiarly strong culture of social and political mobilization in the region that fed the resilience of memory and justice movements. Independently from what was expected by researchers of collective memory, the reinvigoration of memory, truth, and justice mobilizations deserves attention in its own right because of continental geographic spread, its conceptual depth, and thus its political, social, and cultural relevance. It was with this second wave that the main strategists of systematic violence, as well as perpetrators from all military echelons, were taken to courts or brought to court, tried, found guilty, and incarcerated. It was also this time around that more disappeared people found dead, as in the case of the discovery of mass graves, and alive, as in the case of reappearance of abducted grandchildren, despite official efforts to quit the search. And last but not least, it was at this point that the collaboration of civil society with the military regime was fully recognized, resulting in trials involving the participation of civilians in the repressive system and the revisiting of the way the actions of members of the paramilitary and other armed groups contributed to the normalization of the abuse of violence. All in all, the second wave displayed renewed vigor in dealing with the horror of bloodshed in all of its complexity, as it pertained to military and civilian groups, as it linked political ideologies with racial, ethnic, gender, sexual, and class regimes, both domestically and internationally, and as it reflected embedded social contradictions and ambivalence about the very meaning and possibility of justice and equality. The wealth of submissions for this issue reflected relevance of the actual process in progress. Studies about countries with a longer repertoire of policies and a scholarship on memory and justice, such as Argentina and Chile, as well as research about countries that were newer to them, such as Guatemala, Brazil, Colombia, Uruguay, Peru, Bolivia, El Salvador, Paraguay, and Mexico, will make up two each, the second one appearing next year. Researchers were invited to address questions such as how processes of collective memory making had influenced the development of democratic culture and institutions, how the history of violence and systematic abuses of political power were related to the current surge of state and non-state violence in the region, how memory-making efforts could contribute to the understanding and solution of current problems of violence and impunity, how collectives had organized efforts to rebuild memory and demand justice, and what the politics underlying collective memory-making process were, and facilitated or impeded justice. The first issue of these two volumes consists of research addressing counter-hegemonic processes of collective memory-making in general terms, including the new phase of trials and justice and their implications for reconciliation. The articles in this issue expose complexities and contradictions in the processes of counter-hegemonic collective memory-making by looking into the way they took shape over time, changing character and reach, create new meanings, raise new demands, and influence other policy, legal, and cultural spheres. The collection of articles is unique because it is put together from the perspective of an activist scholar, one convinced that ultimately the main purpose of academic research is to further community efforts, dismantle oppressive practices and structures, and bring about social change and justice. By engaging in the study of collective memory from a critical epistemology from below, the issue includes research from scholars across geographical borders and academic disciplines. Articles focus on countries with a longer repertoire of policy scholarships, as well as others newer to them, as I mentioned before. Interdisciplinary scholarship blends sociological, anthropological, historical, political, and cultural perspectives from academics who are in or from the global south or identify with it ideologically. In that way, this special issue contributes to the existing memory studies body of knowledge by bringing in both geographical and ideological breadth. Readers of this issue will find material empirically and theoretically relevant to the development of both scholarly and political knowledge about memory and justice. Because the practice and analysis of cultural memory can in itself be a form of political activism, I would like to end this podcast by expressing my conviction on the value of engaging in these kinds of research projects from an activist critical perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving some insight to this issue, Roberta. And for our listeners out there, again, this Latin American Perspectives issue is titled The Resurgence of Collective Memory, Truth and Justice Mobilizations in Latin America. It is issue 202, volume 42, number 3, and the May 2015 issue of Latin American Perspectives. And I also want to let our listeners know, don't forget to check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/LAPjournal or our websites at www.latinamericanperspectives.com or lap.sagepub.com. Thanks for listening.